We used to have a club in Aylesbury called Friars. It was every Monday night at the Ex-Servicemen's Club. Held about 200 people. Stage was about a foot high, and every Monday they'd have bands. It actually started the same month that Mott were formed, the same month that Zig Zag, the magazine, was started by Pete Frame, and Zig Zag was on sale in the foyer of Friars, which rapidly gained a reputation to have like the most receptive crowd in the country. It was bands like Free, King Crimson, Black Sabbath, even all the bands of the day would play there, and they'd all come off with, they'd get a welcome there that they wouldn't get elsewhere. Like, it was common at that time for audiences to sit cross-legged on the floor, but at Friars they would, at the first hint of a rock and roll bit of mayhem, you'd have all the idiot dancers getting up, flailing their limbs wildly. Bands were judged on, how they went down in the Leapers Corner, which was where all the idiot dancers were congregated, waiting for blast off. And sometimes it didn't happen, but more often than not, the slightest thing, we'd all go mad, and bands loved that. And Mott played there, and December the 6th, I think, 1969. I'd already read about them in Zig Zag. They did the first coverage of Mott. Guy Stevens cornered Pete Frame, and he was raving about this band, saying they're like a cross between Dylan and the Stones. And their first album was called, at that point, Talking Bear Mountain Disaster Dylan Blues. And he said it was going to have a photo of Dylan on the cover and stuff, which it never did. It was the first Mott album, which Andy Dunkley, the DJ, used to play at the club, so we knew about them through that. There was an Island Records sampler called Nice Enough to Eat, which everyone had because it was only 14 and sixpence, so it was cheap. It had At the Crossroads on it. So we knew a bit about Mott, but we sort of thought they were a ballad band. And the first set was Laugh at Me, Half Moon Bay. They were even doing I Can Feel at that point, which were great. They were really good, powerful ballads. Then they did Rock and Roll Queen, and we thought, well, this is interesting, and people started idiot dancing. Then they did You Really Got Me. That was the point where the place just went bananas. We were just blown away. No band was doing this, just going mad, Plus they had the longest hair that we'd seen at that point. Hunter started playing the piano with his foot, Jerry Lee style. The energy level was just going up and up. And by the end of the night, there was stage invasions and everything. It was commonplace a couple of years later, but not in 1969. They were really, really different, wild, and they were immediately invited back to the club a couple of months later and a couple of months after that. And they were always progressively more berserk. And that's it. They'll never look back. 10 days after they first played Friars, they did my school dance, which the guy who started Friars was a teacher at the grammar school. Started it with a guy called Dave Stops. He booked Mott for the Christmas dance, and this was a very sedate affair up until then. It was for sixth formers who were all grooming themselves for Cambridge and their nice girlfriends, and he got this band in who I wasn't allowed to go because I was only in the fifth form, so I wasn't old enough. And disgruntled, I went in the pub over the road, and there's Mott sitting in the corner, who I'd met the week before. Another thing that struck me about them was they were always so friendly. I mean, bands could be a bit stuck up, as bands are. They would come out to the bar, talk to you, ask about, you know, what you were interested in. They made you feel part of their world. And, you know, I saw them in the pub, and they were like, "Are you coming tonight?" And I said, no, I can't, I'm too young. So they were pretty outraged about that, and they got me in as a roadie. I was like smuggled in between Ian and Overend, who, you know, after a couple of pints of beer, I was only like 15, you know, so it was great. I was like, here I am drinking with Mott the Hoople, getting in as a roadie. I watched the set hidden under a table which had the PA stack on it, so it was brutally loud. And when I left, Mick Ralphs said, because I had to be home early, you know, I was 15, I had to be in by 10 or something like that, and I was leaving, and he said, this one's for our mate Kris, who's got to go now. Went into Rock and Roll Queen. So I was late getting home because I was going to leave after that. And my cover was blown. I mean, by that time the headmaster had twigged I was there, so I got a bit of stick for that. But that was it, you know, they were our band, and that was really important, you know, when you're at that age, to have a band that you can identify with, you know, that you feel is like your band. It's not in an elitist way, but they're your band and you follow them, and they're your life in the end. I mean, the whole time Mott were going, they were basically my life. In terms of whatever Mott were doing. If Mott failed, I felt sad. If Mott were triumphing, I felt great. In September 71, Bowie played Friars. By that time had moved to the Borough Assembly Hall, but larger hall. Bowie played there. He had long blonde hair, very nervous, didn't know what to expect. Didn't know if he even wanted to be there, I don't think. He started off with acoustic. It was a bit like that first Mott gig. He started off with some acoustic sit-down songs, you know, which were very nice. He got polite applause, everyone sitting down. Then, last half of the set, he started doing like Queen Bitch, Sweet Jane, you know, that kind of Velvet Underground influence stuff that he turned him round in New York. Hanging around with Warhol and all that mob. He was germinating towards a new persona, which was going to be Ziggy Stardust. And when he played Aylesbury, again, he went down so well. We were sitting in the dressing room afterwards, and he said, next time I come back, I'm going to be something totally different. I'm going to be a big rock star, basically. And sure enough, he did. The following January, he returned as Ziggy Stardust, the first time he played anywhere in the world as Ziggy Stardust, and he came out to the Beethoven music from Clockwork Orange in his white, you know, silver jumpsuit and with the spiders, and nothing was going to be the same again. And from then on, he had a few months where he was playing gigs, same gigs Mott were, your High Wycombe Town Halls and things, and he had a bit of a struggle getting through. Then the Starman single took off, the Top of the Pops appearance. Bowie suddenly became massively hot. But in the meantime, he'd plugged into Mott in the same way that he plugged into Iggy and Lou Reed. He was inspired by, but also vaguely frightened of these highly influential people. So he took them under his wing. He ended up working with them. They were giving him something, like Lou Reed gave him a New York attitude with his lyrics. Iggy gave him the wildest rock star ever kind of mentality. Mott gave him a sort of sense of danger. He was scared to meet Mott. Problem there was Bowie had committed to doing their album. He'd also committed to doing Transformer for Lou Reed. And Ziggy was taken off in a fashion that no one dreamed would be so quick. You know, we thought, he did not know that Ziggy was going to explode like that. It was obvious it was going to be big from that first gig. But it was so alien. It was too much for a lot of people. You know, it was bad enough having long hair in those days, let alone wearing makeup. You know, there was a massive furore, but a lot of the Mott fans got into Bowie. not the more sort of basic Mott fan. I mean, some Mott fans thought Bowie was too effeminate or whatever. You know, it was too much for them. You know, they were shocked. But I'd started following Bowie around like I did Mott, so I was following the two bands. Then when the news came in that they were both working together, I thought, this is great. My two favourite bands have now joined forces, and they're both on Main Man. And Bowie's fan club, because Bowie was going down well at Friars, he'd gone down. He was the best to go down there since Mott, really. His fan club has been done in Aylesbury, so I used to design the little flyers for Friars. So I did the membership card for Bowie, and helped out a bit on that club. And when Bowie took off, they said, well, it's too big for you to do, why don't you do Mott's fan club? So that's how I started doing that. And the Mott the Hoople Sea Divers were born. That's off a track called Sea Diver. So I started writing to the NME with my address to get some publicity, and it was great. This was my passport into the rock and roll world.